delivery, no penalty, will still be paid. So really enabling them to basically take charge of their own safety, which we're very fond of. And as James mentioned, we also work with vendors like Samdesk, who are able to provide us off-platform signal. So what's happening out there in the world that's unrelated to our operations. So when we receive an alert of something potentially happening on our platform, we shut down the area, cancel the orders, and have our partners at ADT actually reach out to Dashers in the impacted area and ensure that they're okay. So I think there's a difference between feeling safe and being safe, and the products that we focus on try to tackle both of those subjects.
I can take swing too. So what we focus on quite obviously is how you operate the vehicle. So most people, if asked, think they're pretty good drivers. Usually it's like 90+% when we serve that. That's obviously not quite true. We have found that enabling people to understand how they actually drive, what specific components of driving they may not be great at. For example, I may hit the brakes too hard, or I may accelerate way too aggressively. All of these things stack up to increase the risk of a crash. And in the delivery rideshare world, that also puts more stress on your car. If you smash the brakes all the time, guess what? You have to replace your brakes sooner. And ultimately, nobody wants to be in a crash. If your vehicle's crashed, you're not out earning. So by educating folks on how they drive, and providing them real-time and post-drive feedback, they start to become safer drivers. And when you have some of these platforms have 500,000, a million, 5 million drivers, if you're moving the needle a handful of percent, that actually adds up to a very sizable outcome in terms of just overall safety and attached directly kind of in his area, these insurance costs. So big platforms spend very large sums of money on insurance. Uber's about $5 billion a year. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to help those drivers become safer, which lowers the clearance frequency, which lowers the cost of insurance, and then there's more money to go back to the drivers.
Just to kind of pull back a little, because I think you were touching on road safety, and you talked about kind of like these customers, and wanted to add like, what is kind of the lay of the land in terms of like the issues that companies are thinking about that drivers might face, and what are those like potential liabilities?
Yeah, of course. I think what DoorDash is doing is incredible. I think investment in these extracurricular kind of areas, these thoughts. With the gig economy, you have a lot of folks outside of the realm of kind of a brick and mortar business of control. They're not in your office. They're not, they're not listening to the pep talk in the morning. They're not listening to an HR manager every day. You need to implement smart controls to help them understand and have some agency about their position. And I think Brendan too made a great point. Usually with a traditional delivery or rideshare company, a lot of the rules start with, well, you got to run an MDR background check, and as long as they pass that check, we're good. We're going to let them on the platform, subject to a couple other items, but it can be that simple. And when you pair something together like with what DoorDash is doing, and Brendan, of course, mentioning telematics, you're proactively getting involved in the life cycle of your employee. So the way that makes it a significant difference is, I've seen many companies where they have drivers with absolutely no points on the record. Everything looks crystal clear. They go out on the road and get in an accident the first couple days. It's, well, why did that happen? Their driver's record was clean. It's like, well, that's really not the entire story. When you pick up these small bits of data through telematics, you can actually get this feedback in real time. Most of these come with dashboards that these, insurance managers or general counsels or, risk management teams can pull up and address, hey, these drivers are distributing are displaying these habits that, quite frankly, are cautionary. And I'm proud to say, like with Hub, we've taken it a step further to diagnose a lot of those driving patterns, including touching your phone too much. And that's outside, of course, the realm of touching your phone to accept a ride or a delivery, but ultimately that manifests together in risk scores and kind of like a gamification of your fleets, which enables a lot of the providers to give some incentives to drivers who are doing a really good job. And it also provides you an opportunity to maybe talk to some of your 1099s or W-2s who are poorly performing, according to the metrics. They might be stopping too hard, they might be stopping too soon, maybe harshly accelerating. It gives you a chance to seek the problem out at its root before an accident occurs and someone gets hurt.
What are some of the sort of like, you're looking at sort of like crisis data, so what are some of the like external safety concerns
That's a good question. I think you sort of hit on the brick and mortar earlier, and I think when we first started working with companies like DoorDash and companies in the gig space, there was this narrative that it was an unsafe space. They're out there in the wild, and who knows what's going to happen. And I think if you look at risk from the traditional lens of we're going to prepare as best we can for the things that we think will happen in this world, that doesn't work, right? There are things that are going to happen, whether it's an active shooting situation or a escaped mountain lion or anything disruptive that you need to be able to find out about in real time. So you can actually leverage AI, shameless plug, Samdesk AI, to find out in real time about anything potentially disruptive. And that could be anything from, there's a large traffic issue here that may disrupt business, or, obviously to the very tragic and very dangerous situations like active shooting situations. Just a kind of a story to highlight, but in August of 2022, there was an active shooter that entered the Mall of America, and Samdesk alerted to that incident based off of a post that we found on the AI found on Reddit, and very quickly pushed to our users that there was a dangerous situation happening at this mall. There were actively dashers heading to that location at that time. The systems talk to each other. We built a fantastic program together, and those drivers are told this is not a safe place to go, and the orders are canceled. And to give you an idea of the speed of that all happened 24 minutes ahead of the mall even announcing that anything was happening. So we have an active shooter alert from Samdesk and visual confirmation of people continuing to walk into this mall. So information can be very hard to gather in critical moments when it's very hectic, and that's just one example. Unfortunately, there are more of them, but very fortunately, I think when it comes to looking after people, we see no higher standard than what gig economy and specifically DoorDash does today with the help of not just us, but a lot of tools.
So when sort of these issues happen, if a driver gets into an accident themselves or if they're hit, kind of what are companies, DoorDash, but also other companies that you guys know or that you work with, like what kinds of insurance? Like, are they doing occupational accident insurance? Like, what's kind of out there?
It depends on the nature of the accident. I would say widely, California has been pretty strong with the administration of occupational accident across rideshare and delivery, so there isn't much of a choice there. Although I was mentioning to some folks earlier, I still do get some businesses who ask me, is that really true though? Do we have to do this? Unfortunately, is the outlook from that side of the table sometimes, but most of the times, that's a very competitive line of insurance these days, and not one I necessarily would say is a problem area by any sense. It's very competitive. It's easy to add to a program. There's a lot of carriers willing to do it. If you move into the realm of auto liability, higher non-owned auto, and general liability for rideshare and delivery fleets, you actually find yourself in quite a difficult situation. And I think kind of a theme from the group that we're building on here is, if this is answering your question or going on a tangent, but really that status quo is not good enough. That if you're sticking to regular rules and not investing in the protection of your 1099s and the knowledge of where your fleet is going and what they're doing, you aren't doing enough. And speaking strictly from my side of the table, when we work with companies, we do our best to help them understand the reason this investment is important. And if you want your program to be working well enough and improving and keeping your drivers safe at the very minimum and keeping the public safe, it takes these levels of investment that we're discussing. I think I went on a little bit of a tangent.
Yeah, I'll add to it. We've seen a huge range in the level of protection afforded to a driver by the different platforms. The rideshare guys tend to be a little bit more regulated. They have very high limit policies. They have commercial insurance policies, and then there's other platforms that the driver's kind of on their own, and there's not a tremendous amount of protection. And from our seat here, we feel like that's most likely all going to shift the way that rideshare went. And the days of just you sign up for my platform, I know nothing about you. If you get in an accident, best of luck. We think those days are probably pretty numbered. So it makes a lot of sense to start planning for what is your business going to look like when you do have to provide a baseline of coverage for people in your
one final, I'll piggyback off that with one final point. Like, you've seen a lot of carriers leaving the state of California. This is not just due to some decisions made by the insurance director of the state, it's also a hemorrhaging, or I guess a little bit of a leakage effect, where we've seen delivery, rideshare, and kind of, as Brendan alluded to, some of these operators pushing the liability onto the policies of their 1099s and their auto insurance, and you can see this as a strong reaction from the insurance community. It's not going to fly anymore, because these carriers are leaving for multiple reasons. I can guarantee you this is one heavy reason they are getting out of many aspects of commercial business and personal lines with businesses attached to it.
So you're saying that, sorry, just to clarify, you're saying that before or up until now, they've been trying to push it on the personal policies of those drivers.
It's been like a best efforts approach, like, hey, if they've got the policy, and by all means, it is still smart as a 1099 to have an insurance policy with a rideshare endorsement. It's very dangerous to proceed if the job is more than a habit without doing that. However, it is generally the nature of many of the companies in the space to try to flesh that option out first. Like, hey, maybe the driver's coverage will take care of it, and kind of alluding or attaching to what Brendan said, like, those days are long moving past us. Those carriers, as they don't move very quickly on the personal side of the world, they don't respond fast. I like to joke it's a glacial pace, but they've noticed, and now they're really buckling down on it. And so they're, as of right now, I'm aware of less than 3 private insurance carriers for personal lines auto that will write a rideshare driver in the state of California right now.
I'm blessed to not have to deal with insurance too much. I just get to build products that keep people safe. But we do have OCAC across the country, even though it's only a legal requirement in California, and that protects if a dasher is injured while they're making a delivery, maybe a trip and fall on somebody's porch or something, they will be covered by our occupational accident insurance, regardless of their location in the U.S., which I know is not the case with everybody, right?
No, it's very commonly brought up and almost challenged even in California. Not to play devil's advocate, margins are never easy with these businesses, so a lot of these small companies, as we talked about earlier too, are also subject to permitting requirements and a lot of other overhead costs that make it really difficult to manage as a startup. So not necessarily always a decision made in haste or for the wrong reasons, but yes, it's an exceptional move by DoorDash to make that choice, because the status quo does seem to be like, well, we're going to keep it for California, and as soon as everybody else comes along, we'll do that then.
Interesting. So I know you've kind of dived into telemetrics, but what are some other, preventative measures, like telemetrics, but also I know Sergio in the last panel, I think he said every single Uber and Lyft driver should have a dash cam, and they should be provided those. So I guess what other sorts of monitoring out there, what are the limits of telemetrics monitoring? What is dash cams for every driver feasible? Yeah, all of that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So we manufacture a rideshare specific camera, so I hope he's right. We'd be thrilled if that news came out tomorrow. But yeah, so when we look at it, the best way to manage a crash is for it to not occur. So that's where you start. Can you make people stay first so that there's less crashes? That's the best option. There are going to be crashes. There's millions of these drivers on the road. Often, the full-time drivers are putting thousands and thousands and thousands of miles a month on their cars. They're going to crash. So the other side of this is when there is a crash, how quickly can we get those people made whole? That's your car fixed, your car replaced in the total loss, the claims paid faster. And telematics plays a huge role there. If you think about the last time you filed an insurance claim, hopefully it was a very long time ago because the process is terrible most of the time. You call somebody on the phone, they ask you 40 questions, they start your file, 2 days later they call back, hey, was it 3rd Street, 7th Street, is that the intersection, and you sure it was 12:30? With telematics data, we have every single piece of information you need for a claim automatically, and it's correct. So there's an awful lot of misremembering when you're filing a claim. If you think about it, these people may have just been in a terrible accident where they're injured, and they're essentially getting interviewed by an insurance adjuster. You're not always going to be completely right. Oh, Step 2 is when they inevitably happen, how do we get that person made whole faster, get them the healthcare they need, get them the car so they can get back out there and continue to earn. So that's the other side of the house. If they're going to happen, let's get them back out as fast as we can.
So you're saying you see it more as like speeding up things after, but also a preventative sort of
Yeah,
vision?
Telematics is both. You asked specifically about dash cams. There's a tremendous amount of value in dash cams, and Sergio said a lot of this in the last panel, but there's these interpersonal conflicts. I said, he called me a bad word, and he says, no, I didn't. The driver called me. So it's this total gray area. And when you have the video, the odds that occurs in the first place go down, because you can see there's a camera right there. But the drivers are able to, click a button on our device, that video goes up. See, this is exactly what really happened. So those platforms do generally default to kick the person off the platform and we'll kind of figure it out over time. But if they have video evidence of it, they can get to the answer immediately. I can look at the 30 seconds where the incident occurred. Okay, yeah, this was the passenger's fault, or this was the driver's fault, and you make the correct decision. And then going back to the claims piece, having a video of the accident is tremendously valuable from the insurance perspective. Did that person run a red light? Yep, there it is. There's the light, it was red, they went through. This is how fast they're going. We can look at the video and see the damage, how much you think this claim is going to be. So all of these things kind of come together to make these drivers ultimately safer, that they save money on insurance, which is becoming, as we mentioned before, just a huge expense, particularly for the rideshare folks.
I'm glad that we don't transport people.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
There's two topics I'd add to that as well. I think Brendan's completely right too. Just culturally speaking, I don't know if anyone's had or played with telematics before or been in a car with a camera, but so Hub, we have our own proprietary driver technology that analyzes your behavior. And they give it out to us, and one day on the way to work, I was like, okay, I'll check this out. I actually put it on my other iPhone that I didn't exchange forever ago. I'm gonna keep it there. It felt a little nerve-wracking. I'm not gonna lie, I drove a lot more precise than I usually do. So it does absolutely have an impact on the force as a whole. But another item I want to hit on specific to delivery and rideshare is there have been a lot of bad habits formed over the course of the tenure of the industry. And what that means is not every driver is going to call and tell you if they've been in an accident. In fact, you can make the argument they've been incentivized not to do that. So cameras and telematics have a really strong interplay here, because if you as a customer service rep can get this notification that this has happened, you've avoided a situation where maybe you've had an injured third party, maybe they've talked to a lawyer, maybe 3 months go by, and you now get a demand letter for $500,000 about an accident you had no idea happened. There's a lot of catch-up work to be done there versus, okay, our system just told us we had a telematic incident. We're going to actually have the cameras automatically pull the footage from right now. We're going to reach out to the driver, which, by the way, is a priceless operational component for many of the reasons Brendan mentioned, not just like to calm someone down and walk them through it, but from just a brand integrity standpoint, you connect with your employees and make them feel more loyalty to you. So I think it's a really important concept between there and within the delivery and the rideshare space, because again, a lot of these drivers will let that slide or not report it, and reinforcing those good habits is critical, because the more time that goes on, unfortunately, litigators in the space are very aggressive, and that's being conservative. The more time someone has to have a lawyer show up and convince them to change their narrative, change direction, change their amounts, change the amount their pain hurts, the more time you've let that thing kind of metastasize and turn into something really nasty that might significantly impact your company. If I can go into one other piece of this, I know I'm going on long here, is fraud. So we're seeing an abundance of fraud these days. We are seeing groups of folks that actually target branded rideshare delivery companies. And honestly, sometimes the advice we try to say is keep your branding minimal, because these groups will go around, and we have the footage, we review it in our transportation teams when we get together to talk about best strategies, where cars will deliberately pull in front of you and absolutely slam on the brakes and just immediately get out and try to file a claim. The traditional approach, by the way, from insurance adjusters is, well, you hit them from behind. So how can you prove that didn't happen without a camera? And so we're just seeing these heightened levels of fraud where just from a baseline standpoint of defending what's right and what actually occurred in the situation is just a really smart choice.
I think one of the things that I've heard over and over from drivers is like when they are trying to report something, like explain that there's been like a safety incident or even just something small happens and they try to contact like the driver support app, often they're getting like canned answers. They're like, I can't get someone on the phone. There's this like, seems to be this like barrier of communication oftentimes where drivers feel like it's difficult to get support with anything. And so I guess I'm wondering with introducing additional monitoring and like more telemetrics, like is there a risk that there will be more ways to like arbitrarily penalize a driver who already complained about like arbitrary deactivations or that sort of thing? So I guess I'm wondering how do you also balance that? Like if you're, looking at metrics and you could be like, oh, this driver is a bad driver, but maybe they're not. Maybe the metrics is showing that's not. I don't know. Like what are the concerns? Are there concerns there about that? And how do you sort of like balance?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, I think at some point there is some decisions to be made by these platforms at scale. What we see is like the top tier drivers versus the bottom tier drivers. That bottom tier is like roughly 6 to 8x more likely to get in a crash. At some point, if your business is driving and you are a very bad driver, there may be other opportunities which fit your skill set perhaps a little bit better. I mean, essentially, the bottom 3 to 4% are adding a humongous amount into the system in terms of cost. And we're also starting to see, Nikki mentioned kind of beyond just traditional crash payments and these lawyers getting involved, we're starting to see massive judgments against some of these platform companies. There were two within the last 2 months that were $40+ million. And once the trend is essentially just not your friend on these platforms. So at some point the business has to think about protecting itself. If all of a sudden everybody that gets in a Uber crash is getting a $40 million judgment from a jury, there's going to be pretty serious issues with the business model. So I think to some extent there probably is some concern amongst the driver population. I would think that that's a fair statement. If I'm a really bad driver, I probably don't want the platform I drive for to know that. I would argue. But at some point, it's unsafe not just for the people that are driving, it's unsafe for me as the passenger, it's unsafe for my grandmother crossing the crosswalk out there. At some point, the overall ecosystem of safety, I think, is priority.
Well, I guess I feel like that. For example, I think, that makes it, if someone is braking a lot or braking really hard, I assume that's maybe one of the metrics that you're looking at. But what if it's braking to avoid hitting some? I just mean there's a lot of ways to interpret data, and so how do you make sure that this is not being used to penalize drivers excessively?
So you're right about braking. Braking is actually the most predictive factor of you filing a claim. So that if you can move anything in terms of what people do wrong, that's the one you want to attack first. If you brake more, it's twice as predictive as other variables. So basically, it's the worst thing for you to do on the whole. Now, CMT's got 11 million drivers on the platform, and we work with a lot of insurance companies. Those insurance companies have to get their scores approved by the regulators in every state. So we've gone through an extremely intensive process of validating that the data is accurate and correct, and it is all tied with claims frequency. So when we say you're at 80, for example, as a driver versus a 75, there's real claims data behind that. Those numbers mean something. It's not just a scale we came up with. That's literally the odds of you filing a claim based on real insurance claims data. So that scale has been tested on tens of millions of real claims.
It's also time-based data as well, so it's not just you had a bad day of driving. Maybe you had a bad day of work or something. It's not specific to one thing. It's aggregated over time. I think most telematic partners usually base it off of about a 3 to 4 week trend. So it's not just one particular moment, one day. So it is his point, a lot of times backed by a lot of different variables within the data. But another, and this is a scalable problem, and it depends on your ops team, and it depends on how engaged you are with your 1099s or W-2s, but I always encourage interviews and conversations. Reach out, have them come in, drive in to tell them about their day, tell them about their driving, and take an attempt at maybe bringing them back into the fold. Because a lot of these scores, by the way, it's not all good and bad. There's always a middle ground. And most drivers do fall kind of in the higher, better, median of the group. So it's not necessarily all bad. When it's bad, it's real bad. So it makes the decision pretty easy. But there's a lot of work that can be done from a employee support standpoint that could be built out. But again, you're talking about scalable issues. A startup delivery company might not have the bandwidth to do that. And so they might have to make those harsher choices.
I'm glad that you brought up interacting with drivers, dashers, because we found great success in not just doing surveys, but we have something called the Dasher Community Council where 6 months in various cities around the US, we consistently meet with the same dashers again and again, get product feedback, what are they seeing, what are they concerned about, and it's about, there is awareness, making sure that they're aware of the various safety features, whether it be telematics, in-app safety features, these AI moderation products that we're building, but it's also us being aware of what are they caring about, what are they worried about. And an interesting finding that within the last year, the number one concern that we've heard from dashers was poor lighting at the point of drop-off. So they're not worried about getting in car accidents, they're not necessarily worried about other things happening. They're worried about you're not turning your porch light on, they're gonna trip and fall. And so what we did was, now at night, we remind you in one of the push notifications we send you when your dasher's nearby, hey, turn on your exterior lights for your dasher safety, and we found that it actually works. People turn their lights on. A teammate was telling me one time, they're sitting next to their significant other, and they get up, go to the door, flip the light on. I'm like, why did you do that? It's like, what do you mean? The app told me to go turn the exterior light on. And so, like you said, it's just super important. Actually get out there, talk to them, listen to their concerns, and then you can create products and processes that really keep them safe and also make them feel safe.
I don't know if you want to talk a bit about what sort of prevent, like how the stuff that you're seeing helps to, I don't know, did you have any thoughts on it? I feel like I neglected it.
He's got some stories.
He's got some stories. I'm not really familiar with insurance. Yeah, I think really it's a very dynamic. It's funny to hear these questions because from my standpoint and other organizations that I work with, large retailers, sort of that brick and mortar retail, when we think about the steps that they take to ensure that their employees feel safe and comfortable, while we'll say there may be slow adopters of technology, I think what we see in the gig space, whether it's DoorDash or Instacart or others, is that if there's something that can be done from a technological standpoint, they do it. I mean, Chad, what was the number last year of dashers? It's a mind-blowing number of bad situations people were pulled out of.
It's not all the worst of the worst. Sometimes it's just like, why is there 15 cops at the mall? I don't want to go there, and then we'll cancel the orders. But thousands of orders canceled. And at our scale, that's a small drop in the bucket. And it's all because of this signal that we're getting from platforms like Samdesk saying, hey, there's something potentially going on over here. Hey, customer, we'll refund you, but we're gonna keep this dasher out of harm's way and not send them there. So really have protected potentially thousands of dashers from going into potentially dangerous or otherwise logistically unsafe situations. So truly a great partnership.
Yeah, and to underscore, it isn't reactionary, right? So it's not like you better get out of there right now. Like you're already in it. Like the whole goal of using real-time data is to proactivity and security and safety is such a buzzword, but if you use the right signals, you can truly be proactive. So that situation, right, the one I mentioned earlier at the mall, they weren't there yet, and that's the whole point. The whole point is that, unfortunately, the risk landscape that we live in is not only increasing in the events are not only increasing in frequency, but the volatility of these events are going through the roof. And you can't rely on a traditional method, which a lot of
traditional companies do, which is just, I'm just going to plan. I'm just going to do a lot of preparation. I'm going to assign this region of the country or city a certain score, and we'll be fine. You have to use the technology that's available as a force multiplier to really protect your people. And I think, from my point of view, there's no one close to that than the gig workers and the organizations they work for. So.
And that's really the power of social listening combined with AI, right? Because we're getting in front of these incidents that, of varying severity, of varying, risk. And what we're finding is we're 30 minutes, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour before news breaks. So news will break, somebody will say, hey, are we on this? Yeah, everyone's safe, everyone's okay. We cancel all the orders. Already done, already safe. And so it's just amazing what the power of, and we have innovators like Samdesk that are doing this, but it really just demonstrates that there are solutions out there that platforms can use to make their drivers safer, even off-platform stuff. Obviously we have really nothing to do with, a bomb threat at a mall. That's not something that, is because of our operations or is one of our customers or anything like that. And so there's definitely a balance between, on-platform, what can we do to stop those angry customers from yelling at people? Off-platform, what can we do with telematics, with folks like Samdesk? It's definitely a balance, and we've started to evolve where we're very confident with our on-platform mitigations and moderation technologies. So now the focus is, all right, things that you can't predict, things that are just going to happen, are just the nature of the world that we live in, and it's how do we tackle those. So it's a difficult but interesting problem to think about how to solve, and we're continuing our journey to become an even safer platform.
I think I saw that DoorDash has a partnership in DC, to provide dash cams. I guess I was just wondering how that's going.
Yeah. So that was a small pilot where we worked with the city, and ironically, we find that dashers don't particularly. It's not rideshare, so there's not somebody in the vehicle, which necessitates a little less concern about dash cams. But I think pilots like that with different cities are beneficial, where we see is this something you care about? Do you care more about the on-platform stuff, off-platform stuff? It's a little bit more relevant to rideshare, but yeah, we were involved in a small pilot in DC where we I don't know if it was a grant or something, but we were partnered with the city and provided some dash cams. That was majority rideshare though. We were just kind of tagging along there.
I feel like one of the things that's kind of come up, I feel like there was this, I think it was a New York Times story that wrote about data on all these smart cars that sounds kind of like telemetric data, that people were getting kind of blindsided because suddenly their insurance would go up. And it was, I guess, because these big car companies were selling their the data from these driver, not these, to be clear, this was just random consumers, not DoorDash or Lyft drivers or anything. But yeah, I guess I'm wondering if you're gathering this other data to sort of help drivers think more about driving better and stuff, what are there privacy concerns there? Could it actually just increase insurance costs for companies? And then I keep returning to this, is it just incentivizing companies to not want to pay, if this is giving insurance companies more info, is it just gonna raise costs and then incentivize companies to just off more drivers, I guess. I'm just wondering, I don't know if that's correct thinking, but.
Yeah, no, I think that too. So if you guys aren't familiar, the New York Times published a pretty large piece that some of the OEMs were capturing driving data and shipping it to insurers. And the big push there was, most of the people didn't know that was even a thing, that was happening, that their data was being shared with insurers. So when you bought your car, you signed the 300-page legalese thing, and on the line you were 480. There was some generic line in your data that you shared, blah, blah, blah. So our executives put out a pretty, I think, insightful piece about why that's absolutely the wrong way to do it. So if you don't educate people that telematics data is being used, if you don't show them their scores, they don't get safer. So just be active. If you slipped our technology in an app and then sent it somewhere else, that defeats the entire purpose of what we're trying to do here. If we don't share with you the feedback, how could you possibly improve? So, most of the time the folks that work with us, they're downloading a separate app. We have walkthrough permissions, and we say, this is why we collect this data, this is what we're allowed to do with it, this is what we don't do with it. The big pushback there was no real end user consent. And that is blown up quite spectacularly. I think the class action's already been filed against those OEMs. They've already put out press releases that they're going to potentially stop doing that. So we take essentially the exact opposite approach of what those guys are doing. And it's not something hidden in the terms and conditions. It's literally a guide when you download our app, or when you're using our technology in another app. This is what we're capturing. This is how we use it. And we show it to the driver. That's what we want to do. So we think that was probably not the greatest decision that those companies made. And I'm assuming that there will be probably a pretty real price to pay for that decision.
I'm going to be careful with this too, because I don't want to play too much of devil's advocate, but just listening to your question in its origination, the big thing I want to hit on is no, they're actually not, they are not capturing that data to make insurance more expensive. They are capturing that data to figure out how to write insurance. So from, I believe, 2017 on, I think every consecutive year in the insurance industry, we've set new aggregate loss records in the history of insurance. And it grows up quite exponentially. So I think between 2021 and 2022, the change was about $3 billion in global paid out casualty losses, and it jumped up to 29 or 26 billion the year following. So we're moving at an exponential pace right now, where right now the top 20 private insurers in the United States are all losing money. They're running a combined 111 ratio, which means for every dollar they get in premium, they lose 11 cents. Again, I'm an insurance broker, my fiduciary is to my clients, but my job is to also make sure that everybody understands the situation. The more data these carriers have, the better that they can operate a business. And as counterintuitive as it sounds, is we do want them to be profitable. Them being unprofitable right now is why everybody's homeowners and auto insurance is so damn expensive in this room. Okay, that's what's happening. They're clawing back rate because they've underwritten their policies poorly. So this was maybe not a great attempt, but an attempt at correcting their system that is right now, for all intents and purposes, quite broken. Just throwing that in there.
I feel like we have very little time left, but I think if you guys could kind of, if there was like one thing that you could change regarding like in the realm of like driver safety, what in a perfect, what would you change? Like what would be your first fix?
Don't blame your dasher when you're missing something. Contact our support, we'll help you out. You don't need to yell at them, you don't need to use them over chat, you don't need to call them on the phone and yell at them. We'll help you. It's okay. We'll get you a refund for your fries. It'll be okay. You'll be fine. That's probably it from me.
I guess I'd go with, I just charge all 1099s working for any of the platforms. Like, with the agency you want for you and your business, read your insurance policy, talk to your carrier, get the rideshare endorsement, invest in it. It might be a costly expenditure right now, but it is not worth the risk of using this as your full-time job without that level of protection. I see it too much where it's not purchased, and it's not. It's usually not exciting to see.
Yeah, I would say, obviously, selfishly, we would love kind of everybody in the gig space to adopt telematics across the board and have every one of these drivers just become notably safer. We've proven that for years. We can make that transition. We do see that happening. So overall, our outlook on these platforms becoming safer is looking very good. We're certainly heading in the right direction in terms of the acceptance both at the driver level and the platform level. So we're pretty bullish on what the future will look like in terms of making these drivers safer.
Yeah, I think mine would just be answer my cold call and it will work. We'll help you out. That's probably good. I think,
technology is there to help. I really think that, especially the word AI is thrown around a lot, but I think if you're willing to embrace just what a multiplier AI specifically can be for you, you'd be pretty amazed at what traditionally took millions of dollars worth of investment can be done with very little investment today. So yeah, answer your local sales guys' cold calls.
Thank you.